everyone, and welcome to Woman Enough for Marriage. My name is Wumi Ajayi. Thank you so much for joining me again. Today, I'll be continuing my series on sex. So, this is Sex Talk Part 5. If you missed parts 1 to 4, please do check them out on my YouTube channel. And if anyone is wondering why is she going on and on about sex, I want to say again, like I said in my previous video, that a healthy sex life is very important to our marital bond. So it's important that we give sex the pride of place in our relationship. Someone once said that it takes more than sex to build a great marriage, but it is nearly impossible to build a great marriage without it. So the key word for me is a great marriage. We all want great marriages. And if we do, then it's important that we take sex important in our relationship. So today I will be talking about sexual dysfunction, sexual satisfaction or fulfillment, and sexual frustration. Sexual dysfunction is any physical or psychological problem that prevents a man or woman from getting sexual satisfaction. So I will start by looking at sexual dysfunction in men. We've got quite a few. There's erectile dysfunction, there's premature ejaculation. I'll talk about erectile dysfunction a bit more later on. Premature ejaculation, where the man reaches orgasm too quickly. We've got delayed or inhibited ejaculation, where it reaches orgasm too slowly or it doesn't reach orgasm at all. We have retrograde ejaculation, and we have low libido. And the causes of this will actually, of the sexual dysfunction, will determine the treatment. There are some physical causes and there are some psychological causes. Some of the physical causes can be low testosterone. I talked about testosterone as a hormone of libido in my previous video. Some prescription drugs can affect it. Some, blood vessel disorders, like men that have high blood pressure, it can be a cause of sexual dysfunction. There could be, it could be as a result of smoking or nerve damage, diabetes and things like that. There are psychological causes as well. Some men have performance anxiety for whatever reason. Some marital problems, like when you have unresolved conflicts, depression, feeling of guilt, stress from work, or money worries and things like that. And it can also be as a result of past trauma. So men that have experienced, maybe sexual abuse in the past, it might actually result in sexual dysfunction for them later in life. So I will just talk about erectile dysfunction because this is about the most common. So erectile dysfunction is the inability to get and maintain an erection that is sufficient for satisfactory sexual intercourse. And like I said, it's very common, particularly in men over 40. If it happens occasionally, maybe because of some of the psychological reasons that we gave earlier on, anxiety, stress, or you've drank too much, or then it's okay because it's common. It happens at one point or the other for in men, especially those over 40. But when it happens often, when it becomes a persistent problem, then it's like there's likely to be a physical cause for it, and the treatment will depend on the cause, which is why I would advocate that we speak to a doctor. I know that there are medication over the counter that men can buy and use, but it's not advisable to just go and buy, because you might end up in a bigger problem when you are self-medicating. It's important. There's nothing to be ashamed of. It's important that we seek medical help so that our doctor can find the cause and know how to treat it, and maybe do some investigations as well before they decide how to treat it. Now, moving on to sexual dysfunction in women. Sexual dysfunction in women happens when there is persistent or recurrent problems with low sexual desire or difficulty with arousal despite sufficient desire. You want to have sex, but you just don't feel aroused. Or when we have difficulty in achieving orgasm despite having been aroused and enough foreplay and stimulation and all that, you just can't achieve orgasm. Or when we have pain during sex or during sexual stimulation. Again, it's not uncommon to have this at one point or the other in a woman's life, depending on what's going on, especially when we're looking at, psychological causes, because in women as well, there are psychological causes that might be responsible for them. And especially when we're going through a phase in our lives where the hormones are all over the place. Maybe you just had a baby or you are going through menopause. It's not uncommon. There are some existing medical conditions, gynecological problems in women. I'm not going to go into them, that might lead to sexual dysfunction in women, which is why it's important that we seek medical help so that we can be investigated. It can also be as a result of, the effect of medication like we have in men. So some antidepressants and blood pressure medication might affect your sexual desire and might result in sexual dysfunction in women. Emotional and psychological stress as well. Like I said, it could be a new baby, anxiety because of work, stress related, work related stress, long-term conflict in our relationship, worry about getting pregnant. Maybe you've had a difficult labor or pregnancy, or you haven't decided yet what family planning method you want and you just worry about getting pregnant. Some of these things can result in sexual dysfunction in women. Female genital mutilation is also a cause of, can also be a cause of sexual dysfunction in women. This is a practice where all or part of the woman's external genitalia is removed. Again, the treatment of sexual dysfunction in women will depend on the cause, and that's why it's important that we seek medical help. I think one of my main points to drive home today is the importance of seeking help and not burying our heads in the sand hoping the problem will go away. It's nothing to be ashamed of. And I want to say that any sexual dysfunction problems that we're having, either it's the man or the woman, it's important that you both see it as a problem for two. So we should say things like, go sort yourself out to our spouse. No, it should be that this is our problem. I will go with you to see the doctors. I will hold your hand while you're having a procedure done. I will remind you to take your medication. I will be there to support you. And again, if you're the spouse that is experiencing sexual dysfunction, your husband or wife they might not want to put pressure on you, even though it's affecting them, because you're both not enjoying your sex lives. So if you're the one that is affected, it's important as well that you consider your spouse, and do something about it. Don't just say, oh, it's not bothered, or she's not bothered, so it's fine. It might not be fine, but it might just be that they don't want to put pressure on you. So very, very important. Seek help, and let's support each other. Now, moving on to sexual fulfillment. I would like to start by saying that when we talk about the need for sex, when we have need, whatever that need is, maybe, need for water or whatever it is, food, when that need is met, it definitely leads to fulfillment. But when the need is not met, it leads to frustration. And the same thing goes for our sexual needs. When our sexual needs are met, we experience sexual fulfillment. When they're not, then it can lead to sexual frustration. And I also like to say that what sexual fulfillment means to each couple is different. It's not a one size fits all. Nobody can say, oh, unless you're having sex every day, you can't be sexually fulfilled. No, for a couple, sexual fulfillment to them might be having sex once in a month. But what is important is the mutual fulfillment. As long as you're both happy, as long as you're both fulfilled, not that one person is not bothered, or one person is fulfilled, one person is happy, and the other person is frustrated. That is what we need to guard against. And also, we need to appreciate the fact that what sexual fulfillment means to a man is different from what sexual fulfillment means to a woman. So it's important that we talk as couples. It's important that we are aware of our differences so that we can harness the power in our differences to both achieve mutual sexual fulfillment and enjoy all the benefits of sex, which I'll be talking about hopefully in my next video. Now, talking about sexual frustration, it's just a situation where there's a disconnect between what you need, or what you want sexually and what you're actually getting. Because like I said, we all have sexual needs, and when those needs are not being met, then we can experience sexual frustration. Sexual frustration causes you to feel angry, irritated, anxious, depressed, and it can lead to low self-esteem. It's like when if sometimes even when you're hungry and you're tired, or you've not had time to eat or had time to rest, we get irritated. And it's the same thing when we're sexually frustrated. You're easily irritated. That's when maybe the kids have to tiptoe around you, your spouse has to tiptoe around you, things like that. Sexual frustration can be related to sexual dysfunction that we talked about earlier on, where, for example, a man that is experiencing erectile dysfunction will be frustrated because he just cannot achieve enough erection to maintain, to have, a satisfying sexual intercourse. And it can also be, sexual frustration can also be related to what's going on in our relationship. For example, somebody who's been rejected constantly, maybe each time they initiate sex, their partner says no, they might get frustrated. They might even get to the point where they feel it's actually no point trying, because I know the answer is going to be no. And we can actually see how this can lead to low self-esteem. When you're constantly being toned down, when you're constantly being rejected, it can actually affect you such that it can affect every other thing as well, and can lead to low self-esteem. When you want to have sex and your partner doesn't want to have sex, or you just notice that you're having sex less often and your partner is not bothered, or you want to have a more satisfying sex, maybe you just think your sex life is mediocre and you just want something more, and your partner isn't bothered. Or sometimes when there's changes in our body, like as women, when we're going through menopause, maybe you just realize that you're starting to lay fat down around your waist, or you've just had a baby and you're just self-conscious, or you don't feel sexually attractive. It can also lead to sexual frustration. So basically, sexual frustration occurs when you simply are not satisfied with your sex life. And some of the things that we can do to avoid sexual frustration: number one is to be committed to meeting each other's sexual needs, because our spouse's sexual needs can only be exclusively met through us. And that's one of the advantages of man. That's why the Bible says each man should have his own wife. That's the way God designed it. And if we know that, we should have a sense of responsibility towards our spouses. It's not a function of whether they deserve it or whether they don't deserve it. We should not use sex as a weapon against our spouse. We also have a duty of care towards our spouses to help them to maintain sexual purity, because sometimes when people are frustrated sexually, they're easily tempted to start watching explicit sexual content, to start developing emotional connections with the opposite sex outside of the home, and things like that. Not that it's an excuse to say, well, my wife made me do it or my husband made me do it, because everyone is accountable to God for their actions. We cannot blame our spouses. But it's also important that we recognize and acknowledge the fact that we, by our actions, can actually help each other to maintain sexual purity and avoid sexual impurities. The other thing we can do is to talk, 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 and talk. Communication is very important. I know that sometimes it's easier to just avoid, sensitive topics or awkward topics, which sex is one. It can be really awkward talking about sex, even as a couple. But the thing is, the more you do it, the less awkward it becomes. The more you do it, the more you grow. The less you do it, the more awkward it will become. So you might be 20 years in marriage and you are still unable to talk about sex because you've not been talking about it. So we need to learn, we need to grow, we need to make effort to talk about sex. Talk about your sexual struggles, talk about sexual needs, talk about whether you're frustrated, whether you're fulfilled. We need to be having these conversations. It's also important, like I said, men and women are different. in our sexual and emotional needs. So it's important that we learn about our spouse's sexual needs, because if we don't know what their needs actually are, we might think we are meeting those needs, but when we're actually not, because we don't really know what their needs are. And finally, I want to say that if you are the one that is guilty of turning your spouse down when they initiate sex, this is the time for you to initiate sex. Surprise them and initiate it. And if you're the one that's been turned down, instead of saying, oh, well, you're initiating it now, I also will say no, so that you know how it feels. Actually, nobody stands to gain anything from that. It's important that if the person that's rejecting you is now initiating it, accept it gracefully and let so that you can move on and grow in your sex life. I'm going to stop here. Thank you so much for joining me. Do you remember, like I always say, that marriage is not about counting the years, it's about making the years count. I will see you in my next video. God bless you. Bye.